Good morning and welcome to Grace Presbyterian Church. We're glad that you have joined us either in person or online, and we trust that you'll be blessed by your presence with us today. Every human community struggles at times with boundaries. Who's in? Who's out? Who decides? That sort of argument is as old as time. And those who wrote our Bible wrestled mightily with that topic. Especially after losing their promised land to foreign influence, people of Israel really wondered how they might decide who was a good, faithful Jew and who wasn't. Sometimes the rules were strict, incredibly strict. During the time of Ezra, for example, every Jewish man was required to divorce his foreign wife, no exceptions. That was it. But in other times, the boundaries were much broader, even though some people weren't too happy with it. Some people chose to make a stink. Today's Bible reading is about one of those stinky episodes and the way God cleared the air. I think you'll find it to be encouraging. But at this point in our service, I invite you to join me in the worship of a God who sent his only Son that we might be included in the blessings that he brought for all time.
Please stand and join me in the call to worship. How good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down upon the collar roofs. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For their Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore.
may be seated. This time I invite the children to come forward as I have a special word for them. And as they're coming forward, I'll ask the adults to pass the friendship pads found next to the center aisle. Take notice if there's someone new beside you, and be sure to greet them a little bit later in the service. Morning, boys and girls. Great to see you today. Thought we might play a little game together this morning, one you probably have played before. It's called Simon Says. You know what that one, how that works? You do? Awesome. Because there's how we do it. If, when I say Simon Says, you repeat it, but if I don't say Simon Says, you don't, okay? Oh, good, we got the Miyakis coming too, so we got a crowd now. We'll see if the adults get it right. They usually don't. Okay, so are we ready? Well, first off, Simon Says, touch your nose. Cool. Simon Says, scratch your head. Simon Says, twist your mouth around. Simon Says, blink. Simon Says, scratch your arm. Scratch your other arm. Oh, most of you got it. That was pretty cool. One more round. Okay. Simon Says, stand up. Simon Says, jump up and down. Simon Says, wave your arms. Simon Says, stop waving. Simon Says, turn your head. Stop turning. You guys are good. I have to impress. You're really good. Okay, you be seated. Even though, we're good. We're done. Simon's done. The reason I do all that, though, is it's kind of a fun game. But when you think about it, the game's a lot about who's out. If you don't do quite the right thing, who's out. And there's lots of games like that we play in the world today. Here's one of them. Baseball. What does that mean when the umpire does that? You're out. That's it. You struck out. Here's another one, a game. It's called soccer. What's that red card mean? You are out big time. Big time. The whole game, not just for a little while. The whole game. You are done. And there's lots of times in human history where whole society spent lots of time and energy figuring out who was out. The ruler's job, especially, a lot of times was figuring out who was in, who was out. They pondered that quite a bit. But the cool thing is, for us as Christians, Jesus didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about who to throw out. He spent most of his time trying to figure out who he could bring in, who he could touch, who he could bless, who he could reach in all kinds of ways. So the next time you might be tempted to think, I don't like that guy or girl, I'm going to throw them out. Instead, you might be thinking, I challenge you to think about Jesus, because he's the one who always figures out new ways to bring folks in. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for the witness of our Savior, Jesus Christ, who shows us how we might be included with love and praise and joy. And we do ask it in his holy name. Amen. Thank you, gang. Have a great time in Sunday school. Have fun. We'll see you later.
Trusting in the promise of grace, let us tell the whole truth about ourselves and ask for God's mercy, so our lives can be made new. Please stand and join me in the prayer of confession. Blessed and holy Redeemer, it is so easy to point fingers at those who are different from us. It is so easy to see their sin and so hard to see our own. Give us the grace to see each other as the broken out, beautiful children for whom you died. Then teach us to love one another with your redemptive love. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Rejoice and be glad. Our God is full of mercy, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. In Jesus Christ, we are forgiven. Thanks be to God.
Thank you for that wonderful reminder, John. As we come together this morning, we're so blessed to be in worship together. We lift up our hearts to him.
see. You are my all in all. Seeking you as a precious jewel, Lord, to give up I'd be a fool. You are my all in all. Taking my sin, my cross, my shame, rising again, I bless your name. You are my all in all. When I fall down, you pick me up. When I am dry, you fill my cup. You are my all in all. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. You are my strength when I am weak. You are the treasure that I seek. You are my all in all. Seeking you as a precious jewel, Lord, to give up I'd be a fool. You are my all in all. Jesus, Lamb of God, worthy is your name. 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 Worthy is your name. Worthy is your name.
Having now celebrated the worthy name of Jesus, I invite you to greet one another in the name of Jesus at this time in our service. Now is the time in our church when we share news of the church family, and we've got some good news to share. First, next Sunday is going to be a very special day because that's the day we celebrate more than 2 decades of church ministry from Donna Kilpatrick. She's been incredible. I tend to think of Dawn as sort of like the keel on our ship. She just kept us moving forward through lots of ups and downs and ins and outs. She's really been astonishing. We appreciate her temperament. We appreciate her skills. We appreciate her faithfulness. And we want her to know how much we appreciate her next week, because that will be her last Sunday with us. She's retiring. It's the bad news, but we're going to send her out with a bang. So, if you have a card you might want to send, that would be great. If you'd like to contribute to a church gift, we're going to be doing that as well. We'll recognize her both during worship and afterwards, even though it embarrasses her to death. We can't let her just slip out quietly. We have to make it a really big deal, and I hope you'll join us in that next Sunday. Also, I'm happy to report that small group dinners are about to resume. There's really no better way to get acquainted with other people in the church. You don't have to be married. Singles are welcome, and you can sign up for that right after church today. We'd love for you to be a part of it. Third, there are 2 new choirs starting up this year. In addition to our regular chancel choir, which will resume in September, Zach is recruiting a children's choir that will rehearse right after church on Sundays. That can be a lot of fun for kids. And Debbie Smith is working really hard to recruit a bell choir. Thus far, she has 9 faithful ringers. She really wants at least a couple of more. And the great news is, you don't have to read music. You don't have to sing. All you have to do is count. If you can count, Debbie wants to hear from you. And she would be thrilled to put together that group. They'll be rehearsing on Thursdays starting in September. Finally, I'm happy to report that one of our new members, Linda Carson, is going to be organizing 2 new prayer groups beginning actually in October. One will meet in the morning and another one at night. They'll be meeting on Zoom, so you never have to leave your home. It's very accessible to shut-ins and everyone else. And she would be so happy to have your name included in that list. She says she'll never make you pray out loud. If you just want to listen, that's okay. But that also is a great way to build a sense of connection both with God and other people. So if that sounds interesting to you, let her know. Her contact information is in the bulletin. You can also call the office if you're listening online. Moving on to prayer concerns. I won't repeat those that were mentioned in the past, but I do have a few new items. First, we've been asked to pray for the family of Brennan Casey, who died quite suddenly last month. Also for the family of Annie Torres, George Castro's sister, who also passed away last month. Carol Nash requests our prayers for the healing of her clavicle that was injured in a fall 3 weeks ago. Sally Grothy requests our prayers for her heart condition. And Margaret Barrett requests our prayers for her husband, Nevin, who was hospitalized with a heart attack last week. I'm happy to report that he's home from the hospital, but I know they would appreciate your continued prayers. And so with those thoughts in mind, let's pray now. Dear God, we are so grateful for your presence with us, in our joys and in our sorrows, in our laughter and our tears. You walk with us. You promised you would. Lo, I am with you always. Encouraged by that holy presence, by the record of your work in Scripture, where so many lives are changed, we intercede for all those on our prayer list and all those in our hearts whose names now come to mind. God, you know these dear people even better than we do. You love them just as much as we do. And so, God, we do ask that you would save them, heal them, call them, draw them to yourself. And that in this noble work, Lord, you use us as your vessels of mercy, grace, and peace for the sake of Jesus Christ, our Savior. For it is he who taught us to pray by saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Oh
Thank you, choir, for that very creative arrangement of some classic songs and hymns set by a river. I think many people long for that sort of restful place, the kind you find beside a river. But getting to that place can be difficult, especially when those who walk with you are unsettled in some ways. According to the Hebrew Bible, the people of Israel were unsettled in all sorts of ways during their journey to the promised land. Last week, they were unsettled by fear. This week, they are unsettled by strife, interfamily strife. And they simply can't move forward until that problem is resolved. I think the story has much to teach us about the ways we resolve strife and the ways that God works through it. So I invite you to listen carefully now for the Word of God to you.
About this time, Miriam spoke up against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had recently married a Cushite. Along with Aaron, she said, "Does the Lord speak only through Moses and not through us?"
Keyword here is Cushite. What's a Cushite? Well, technically, it's a person born in Cush, one of the greatest civilizations in the ancient world, far greater than Egypt for at least 1,000 years. Lies in the country we would call Sudan. The Cushites were most famous as archers, incredibly powerful archers, sometimes using their feet as well as their hands to stretch the bow out far. They also created several innovative irrigation systems, first building shallow dams to capture rainwater in the rainy season, then using oxen for the very first time to power a water wheel that lifted the water out of the reservoirs to irrigate their fields. The Cushites actually built pyramids, every bit as impressive as those in Egypt, and they built their own temples too. Cushites allowed their women to have a lot of authority, especially in worship. And this may have been one reason that Miriam was not too thrilled when Moses picked a second wife from Cush. His first wife, Zipporah, was not Hebrew either, but at least she was a Midianite, ethnically close to the Hebrews. Whereas Zipporah was different both culturally and racially. The people of Cush were very famously dark-skinned. Thus, from everything we can tell, this was the first interracial marriage in the Bible. We don't know exactly why Miriam opposed it. Scripture doesn't tell us that. But from the long history of controversy about interracial marriage in Judaism and Christianity, I think it's fascinating to notice that Moses, no one less than Moses, was the first one to do it in Scripture. It's also fascinating, I think, to hear the argument made against him. Notice Miriam doesn't say he should not have married a Cushite. Miriam doesn't say, we like Zipporah better, though she probably did. That motive is concealed. Instead, with Aaron's backing, Miriam basically says, Moses ain't that hot. He's really not that great. The same God who speaks through Moses speaks through us. Technically, that was true. God could speak through Aaron and Miriam. God did it many times. But the implication of all that was, Moses. And God was not too pleased with that.
Knowing that Moses was a humble man, more humble than anyone else on earth, the Lord called Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, saying, "Come out before the tent of meeting, all three of you." Then the Lord came down in pillar a cloud that stood before the entrance of the tent, where he called Miriam and Aaron to come forward.
Keyword here is humble. Moses was more humble, the text says, than anyone else on earth. Wow, that's going some. The word humble, translated humble as anah in Hebrew, used about 19 times in the Old Testament, can be translated as humble, meek, even poor. And some very famous verses with it. One of them, Psalm 37, Jesus quotes it later, the meek shall inherit the earth. Another one, Psalm 147, the Lord opposes the proud, but exalts the humble. But perhaps the most famous one is in Jesus' mission statement from Luke 4, I came to bring good news to the poor. That word poor is actually anah in Hebrew, humbled. This morning's text, I don't think Moses was literally poor. He was in charge of a whole nation at this point. But Moses was humble in the traditional sense of the word, so humble that he quickly invited other folks into leadership. In the chapter just before this one, Joshua actually complains about it. He says, Moses, there are two unauthorized people prophesying in the camp. Stop it. Moses says, no. I wish everyone would prophesy. Everyone be connected to God in that special way. Something really special about that, I think. But it can also be problematic when tough decisions must be made. Who's out? Who's in? Who decides? Since Moses was too humble to take that step in this passage, God does. And God makes it very clear.
The Lord said, "If there is a prophet of the Lord among you, I reveal myself to him in visions. I speak to him in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He has been faithful with everything in my household. With him I speak face to face, clearly, not in riddles. That's why he alone can gaze upon the Lord."
Two key words here. One's faithful, aman. In Hebrew, a really important word in both Testaments. In Hebrew, it means reliable, steadfast. And the key thing about Moses was that he had been faithful in everything. Every sacrificial offering, every sacred vessel, no bribery, no graft. Faithful with every person in the camp, he has not failed the sacred calling of the Lord. The second key word is gaze. Hebrew, it means sustained, intentional looking. Our text says Moses alone can gaze upon the Lord. In the early days, he just caught glimpses, like with the burning bush, he just saw signs. But as his faithfulness increased year by year, so did Moses' ability to perceive God's holy presence. It only increased as they continued to meet face to face. When you think about it, there's really not much better than that. It bothered me for years that Moses didn't get to enter the promised land. He never quite gets that far. And in some ways, the thing he did get was even better. After all, land comes and goes, kingdoms come and go, but to perceive the God who made the land, not only that, the stars, the sun, the moon, the galaxies, we're just now beginning to perceive. To recognize the God who created all that, to spend time in that God's presence, there's really nothing better. Moses got that in this life through Jesus. You and I can get that in the life to come. I'll say more about that one soon.
Why were you not afraid to speak against my servant, Moses? At this, Yahweh's temper flared, and he left them. Once his cloud had lifted from the tent, Miriam's skin was repulsive, white as snow. After Aaron turned to Miriam and saw this, he said to Moses, "Please, my Lord, do not hold this foolish sin against us."
The word here is repulsive, Torah, in Hebrew, traditionally translated leprous, but leprosy actually does not turn the skin white. It rots it in some ways, but it never goes white. The disease in this case might have been vitiligo, which does turn skin white. Michael Jackson very famously had that on his face. But the great irony in this case is that the woman who complained about Moses' dark-skinned wife suddenly finds her own skin to be too white, embarrassingly white. And looking at that spectacle, the one who joined her in the efforts to minimize Moses now does just the opposite, calling his brother Lord. "Please, my Lord, don't hold the sin against us." Fortunately for both of them, the one man who was faithful in everything in God's house decides he will comply.
So Moses cried out to Yahweh, saying, "Please, God, heal her. Do not let her be like a stillborn child, coming forth from the womb with half its flesh consumed." The Lord replied to him, saying, "If her father spit in her face, would she not be disgraced for 7 days? Therefore, let her be restricted from the camp for 7 days. After this interval, she may be brought in again."
The spitting line's kind of strange here because there's no record of that in Scripture. God never said that fathers should spit or punish their daughters in that way. There's no record of that being done anywhere else. Nonetheless, it must have been pretty common in the culture of that day. It's also helpful to this extent. Even with the ugliness of that image, the daughter was not disowned by the father, no matter what she had done. And in a similar fashion, Miriam was not disowned for her actions. Punished, to be sure, but only for a time. And I think there's hope for all of us in that.
So Miriam was restricted from the camp for 7 days, but the people did not move out until she was restored again. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
How many of you have heard this story preached before? Not many, I suspect. One reason is that at first glance, it seems to be sexist. Why does Miriam get punished and Aaron doesn't? Doesn't seem to be fair. But if you read the story quite carefully, you'll notice two important things. First, Miriam takes the lead in undermining Moses. That verb there is female singular. She's the spokesperson. While Aaron takes the lead in confession. Don't hold this sin against us. Even calls his brother Lord. It's also important, I think, to realize that God takes up for Moses in this passage against both of those complainers. He does some things for Moses that Moses won't do for himself. God defends Moses' honor, if you will, for two reasons, two important reasons. First, Moses was not arrogant, didn't see himself as special. even though God quite clearly did. Second, Moses was faithful in everything he did, or almost everything. Certainly with every member of God's house. Because of God and Moses, I think there are at least 4 things that we can glean from this text. The first is simply this: the stated reason for a critique is often very different from the real reason for critique. The stated reason here was authority. Why, we can prophesy for God just as well as he can, but the real reason was something else. Something deeper, perhaps something bitter, something Miriam didn't actually want to say out loud. If you've been in leadership for any length of time, you will have probably experienced this. Someplace, sometime. They might say your work is sloppy when it wasn't. They might say you dropped the ball when you didn't. They might say you turned off customers when you didn't, at least not often. And actually, there was something else, something they would not name. Most often, the complainer felt slighted in some way. Something you said or did or didn't do, but it feels really petty to say that. They look for something else, something tangential to the real problem, something that they can attack. It's really important now and then to perceive that. Wherever you may serve, you won't please everyone, no matter what. Jesus didn't please everybody either, nor did Moses. But they continued with their ministry. They continued with their calling. And that leads to the second point. Sometimes the best response to critique is to ignore it, just as Moses did. Didn't defend his honor, didn't defend his ability to prophesy, didn't refute the stated claim, didn't even defend his wife, interestingly enough. Unlike Will Smith, didn't punch him out. They might have been tempted to do that. Instead, he simply let God speak while continuing his own ministry and call. And there's so many examples of that in Scripture. Nehemiah didn't go down to his critics when rebuilding the city's walls. He just kept up the work. David didn't deal with fierce critics after Absalom's rebellion. Even when one of them was throwing stones at him, he did not retaliate. He simply trusted God to get him through. Perhaps most important of all, Jesus did not respond to critics on the night he was betrayed. He simply said to God, "Thy will be done." There are exceptions, of course, especially in the life of Paul. He responded to critics emphatically. But when you are truly humble, when you do believe that God can work in all sorts of ways outside of you, sometimes it really is best just to keep your mouth shut. Don't get distracted. Don't get annoyed. Just keep on doing the work that you were created to do. There's a lot to be said for that. Second thing to learn from the text, here's the third one. Really the best part of this passage, the very best part of all, is that everyone is delivered in some way. First, the Cushite woman who could have been thrown out, kicked out of the camp, thrown out in the wilderness on her ear. In spite of Miriam's machinations, her status is preserved. Second, Moses is delivered from the aspersions about his character and his judgment. God stands up for him. Third, Aaron is delivered from great danger through confession of his sins. Don't hold this against us, Lord. And God doesn't. But just as important, I think, Miriam is delivered. First, she is delivered from her bigotry or jealousy, perhaps. But ultimately, she's also delivered from her sin. When all is said and done, when those 7 days are completed, they won't move out without her. And in time, I think her legacy would also be restored. She still is Moses' sister. She still speaks for the Lord. Her legacy is secure. So the best part of this text is that everyone is delivered in some sense. But the best part of the gospel that we know, is that we can be delivered from the perils of our sin in Jesus' name. Jesus is our Moses, the one who was unfailingly faithful in all he said and did. Jesus' teaching was God's teaching. Jesus' example was God's example. And when Jesus reached out to those whom others might reject, he set a pattern for each of us as well. Black and white, male and female, powerful and weak. He reaches to every one of us, no exceptions. You might be interested to learn, perhaps because of this text and others, that the nation of Cush, modern Sudan, actually developed a very strong Christian church in the 4th century. They love to hear what Christ did and the difference it made for them. Through the work of some faithful missionaries whom I know in South Sudan, that message is continuing today. But today I think it's also important to acknowledge that central trait that Jesus and Moses had in common: humility. In spite of all that Jesus could do, all the power and fame he could have won, the choices that he made to be humble. Second chapter of Philippians puts it this way: have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very form of God did not consider equality with God as something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in human likeness. And having appeared in human likeness, he humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place, gave him the name above every name, that the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. That passage is sometimes called the great reversal. The one who humbled himself was exalted par excellence. But the good news is that through his humility, we are touched and called and saved. Through his example, we can also do that for others. Let us pray. Dear God, we are so grateful for faith leaders who reached out to those who were different back in the day. Started way back with Moses more than 3,000 years ago. But it culminated in the one who lived and died and rose again to bring your grace to us. Inspired by his example, help us give our lives for others, especially those who are excluded in some ways. We do ask it in his holy name. Amen. Go forth now in peace. And as you go, may the God of peace, who sent his Son to save us and deliver us from sin, make you complete in everything good, working among us that which is pleasing in his sight, through the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen.